Okay. Well, good evening. My name is Mark Stavish. I'm Director of Studies for the Institute for Hermetic Studies, those folks who have been giving you these wonderful books at today's conference. And the presentation I'm going to be giving is Magic, Media, and the Paranormal. So, there's just a brief list of some of my publications. It's on alchemy, Kabbalah, astrology, and a variety of metaphysical topics. I know this slide is a little hard to read, but this will be on YouTube, so you'll be able to access it there if you like. One of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, why does the media matter, particularly in terms of paranormal? And it's because, as Allen Ginsberg has told us, whoever controls the media, that is the images, controls the culture. And that really is the basis of our presentation. How we present things often defines what it is, the message that we walk away with, and why that's important. Now, a definition of magic, which is very useful to us, comes from the great Romanian scholar Iono Culianu, who says, magical action occurs through indirect contact, through sounds and images, which exert their power over the senses of sight and hearing. Passing through the opening of the senses, they impress on the imagination certain mental states of attraction or aversion, of joy or revulsion. Now, look at, how's that any different from advertising, right? You turn on your television, and what do? You get a lot of images presented to you. And often it's an image desirable that you want to purchase this thing. During the political season, which you're inundated with, it's both desirable, vote for our candidate, and images of revulsion. Don't vote for the other guy, the other candidate, whoever that happens to be. So Culianu's notion of magic is really no different than our notion of media. Why is this important? Well, of course, as you know, everyone's been hearing it right for probably 30 or 40 years now. You know, as our expert here says, Chuck Klosterman, pundits are always blaming television for making people stupid, movies for desensitizing the world to violence, and rock music for making kids take drugs and kill themselves. These things should be the least of our worries. The main problem with mass media is that it makes it impossible to fall in love with any acumen of normalcy. There is no normal because everybody is being twisted by the same sources simultaneously. Now that's the important point. When we're trying to establish a baseline of discussion on any topic, we want to say, what is normal? Yet if we're constantly being inundated by the same ideas, by the same sources, how do we know what really normal is? Whether it be in the normal world of day-to-day life, or as we'll see, in the paranormal world, or the world of psychic exploration. Because when we have the same sources, what do we end up with? Always the same views. How does this work? Well, you know, you all have experienced it. Tell people that you're into paranormal investigation, and what do they think? Right? That's what they think. Because, of course, as we know, no human being ever stacks books that way, right? Now, when you're into paranormal investigation, what's going on in your mind? What do you think of yourself? No, right? Come on, you all want the Batcave, right? Well, you're still better off because, you know, this is what my in-laws think. Now, each show and each slide that I've given you has what? A complete impression with it. It's a complete package of knowledge. I don't even have to explain it to you. You automatically know what the cultural values are that it contains. Now, why this again is important is because, as we'll see, how we process information, well, it's simple. The medium is the message. Now, think about that. The medium is the message. That means, for us, that the medium, or means by which information is delivered, is as important, if not more so, than the content. The vehicle shapes and influences how information is not only received, but also how it's understood, and therefore its impact. We live in a highly visual culture, right? So those images, we don't even actually often think about them and translate them into words. It bypasses that part of our brain and goes right to the impact stage. Now, for many of us, particularly in an era in which we're talking about folks that are spiritual but not religious, and I've asked this question to many people here, particularly when they're having paranormal problems, I say, do you have a regular spiritual practice? Many of them often say no. I've even asked that of many paranormal investigators, which I find interesting. You're investigating what you may consider to be life after death or this fourth dimension of mind, but do you have a day-to-day practice in which you try to understand your own mind in relationship to it? When the answer is no, it means something very important to us, particularly, and that is that the television is the new pulpit. Our spiritual and metaphysical views, and possibly, as we're going to see, experiences, as a result, are being shaped by the media. Television and movies in particular, and to a lesser degree music, comic books, and other forms of infotainment, shape what we do and what we believe. We have, as Christopher Partridge said, we have seen the birth of the occulture, or an increasingly seeing what was once hidden, deviant, and occult as increasingly ordinary. Everyone tells me the same thing. You know, I'm finally glad to be at a place where I can meet people of a similar mind. You know, I often run into people who say, you know, I'm so glad. I thought, you know, no one else around here was interested in this. And you know what my response to them is you're right. Barnes & Noble has all those books just for you. Right? Just for you. You're a special snowflake. All of that book, all of that information, books, movies, videos, even songs. I heard some wonderfully interesting songs on the radio today. One guy was talking, he's describing the lyrics of the song before he played it. You know, it had to do with, he goes, this is a great song, you know, it has to do with casting some black magical curse on your ex-girlfriend, you know. Actually, it's a pretty decent song, but just the idea that it would be in there and that they would talk about it such. Again, that what was once hidden is now more and more part of the culture. A culture of the occult is what we have created, or a culture. This is so critically important, and I want you to understand how, again, because we are a visual culture, increasingly so, how an image defines a word. I don't have to say anything to you. I don't have to tell you where this is from. I don't have to tell you what it's about. I don't have to say a single thing. I don't know anyone who doesn't know this image. At the same time, if I say the word exorcist, exorcism, demon, demonic possession, I don't know a person who in some way doesn't think of this image or one closely related to it. Because it has become so widespread, it defines our thinking about the experience. This goes straight into your unconscious and invokes a host of ideas and images and maybe even sensations. Right? We see that with regular advertising, and we often experience it and recognize it. The same goes on here as well. Is there anyone who doesn't know this image? I didn't think so.
You know Jason Miller very well.
That's right. Jason Miller is a local boy, University of Scranton. There's a nice...
His asses are right next to City Hall.
Yep, he is a local guy. Now, what we're talking about here is a form of sensitivity training. And why this is important, this exteriorization of interior matters, is because what we're talking about is what, of course, Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman talked about in his book on killing, is desensitization. Now, we see that a lot with media violence. It desensitizes us to violence as a whole, and specific forms of media can even be used to acclimate and train us to particular forms of violence. This is what we call operative conditioning, and we see it a great deal in the media of movies, television, and even video games. But just as we can be conditioned towards or away from violence, we can also be conditioned towards or away from many other experiences. And that's what we're talking about here. Media presentations of the paranormal, what we're seeing, are increasingly accompanied by an increased report of paranormal phenomena, an increase in people participating in paranormal research or activities. How many of you came to paranormal research because of something you saw on TV? Or something you saw on TV finally tipped you over and said, oh, that looks like fun, or I could do that, or that's interesting. Probably more than you're willing to admit. How many of you have a particular movie or television show in the paranormal that you secretly influences you, but you don't want to admit to the rest of us? Come on. How many Supernatural fans? Yes.
I was in a haunted house from the time I was 5 on.
Okay.
So I knew this stuff before I watched it on TV. But I had Rod Serling as a professor.
That's right. That's right. You had him as a professor?
Yeah, he was a visiting professor at Ithaca College.
Ithaca College, yeah. He was a local boy, Binghamton. He was a Binghamton boy.
And he thought, we see him on the Twilight Zone. Someone asked him while we were and I don't mean to steal the show, but
Please do.
At a lecture, he came and talked about TV and radio, and then he said, you can ask me anything. So somebody asked him about what he thought about the Vietnam War. And it had been a rainy, cloudy day. And he starts off, he says, well, it doesn't seem to be going so well. And he has that, the way he talks on the TV, that's how he talks. He had that magical voice. And he says, I think mankind could aspire to better things. And it was so eloquent. And as he spoke, the sun burst through the clouds.
Yeah.
I swear this is true.
Yeah.
And when it got done, we were so stunned that everyone sat there for 2 minutes, or what seemed like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And then we all stood up and so it was just standing
Well,
up.
he's a perfect example. He was a fantastic writer. Of course, as you know, he was a World War II veteran in the Pacific. He was a paratrooper there. Those experiences shaped him, and he brought that to the media. And at the same time, he knew very well the power of media. He was quite well aware of it in its early stages. So thank you for bringing that up. I mean, it's really great because he is one of my favorites. But my point is, again, these shows do have an influence on us whether we recognize it or not. And what happens here then is number 3, generally favorable attitudes towards esotericism, alternative spirituality, New Age concepts, and occult in general often occur. Now, a friend of mine pointed out to me, when he looked at this presentation, he was a professor out at JFK University in San Jose, California. He said a lot of this is often new. He said in the 70s and 80s, a lot of the shows on the paranormal weren't quite as favorable. Okay, but in the 90s, we began to see that change with Crossing Over. That was an extremely favorable view of channeling and psychic contact. And of course, almost all the shows we've seen recently are favorable. So that makes people more willing to talk about it and discuss it. Now, we don't know if the experiences people are reporting are authentic or not. We just know they're reporting them. And you all know from research that's an issue. Is it real, or is it all just make-believe or in their mind? In some ways, as far as we're concerned, it doesn't matter, because what we're talking about is cultural influence, the fact that people are talking more about it. They're having events like this. Okay? All those, there's 19 investigative paranormal shows on TV last time I checked. 19. Think about that. It's huge. Okay? But what we're also seeing then is what? Something very simple. The power of suggestion. Okay? Now, what does suggestion do? It works best through repeated exposure over time. So the more you're exposed to an idea, the more you become acclimated to it. And repeated exposure to ideas shapes our ideas of ourselves and that of others. Now, can there ever be too much of a good thing? Well, it all depends on who you ask, right? Any Supernatural fans here? Yeah. Can you actually watch too much Supernatural?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah. Okay.
We were binge watching. I was trying to catch up.
Okay, you're binge watching. Okay, but what was the word? Binge watching. Okay. Do you feel completed by Dean Winchester?
I just like how they come up with things in 30 minutes, an hour, and it's done. It's like
You wish it were that easy, right?
you wish it was that easy.
Okay.
You're trying to figure out what's happening.
Well, everybody I know has a favorite episode. My favorite episode is Everybody Hates Hitler. Anyone see that episode? Yeah, well, that happens to take place in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And it's just interesting because, I was interviewed for a documentary on Nazi occultism in the late 1990s, and I published this article, and it just happened to be talking to someone about a story I was working on about a golem in Wilkes-Barre. And suddenly, hey, it shows up. You'd think they'd at least send me a free DVD, right?
At least of that season.
Yeah. But it works, for those of you not involved in media, you don't often understand the power of it. I'm deeply involved in media, and that's why I'm telling you this, okay? I mean, this show saved an entire publishing genre, okay? It had an 8-year run, and there's a reason for it, because it hit the right nerve, it hit the right audience, but at the same time, if your book appeared on this show just in passing, your sales skyrocketed, okay? How? How does half a second or 2 seconds of an image of a book on a show cause those sales to go? The power of suggestion. I cannot underestimate or understate the influence of it there. In fact, the power of suggestion is so good and often so positive. Frankly, it's a mystery to me. I don't understand how this works. But somehow, I don't know, even my son has taken an interest in noir, in jazz, and all sorts of, I don't know where it comes from. I think he suddenly likes 1930s, 40s detective movies. I don't know why. But it goes beyond that. When we're dealing with suggestion, we're also dealing with questions of where do we unconsciously influence paranormal phenomena? Now, is everyone here familiar with the Pulpit experiment? Okay. For those of you who aren't, the Pulpit experiment initially occurred in Toronto. It was repeated several times, 1972. And a fictional character, Philip Aylesford, was created and used as the focal point for a seance, wherein the participants did not know that Philip was not a historical person. He was make-believe. Okay? Now, a variety of results were obtained. There was a variety of phenomena was recorded every time this experiment was redone. What's most interesting to me, though, is that they got the best results when they changed the format of the seance and did it in a traditional 19th century seance format. So it was less sterile, less, well, I don't want to say scientific, but it had less the feel of a laboratory to it. They dim the lights, they have candles, you get the idea, right? Kind of like, would you rather do a seance in this room, or would you rather do it next door? Right? This one has a certain ambience to it. And that context, that medium is the message, that begins to shape the results. It has an unconscious influence on what occurred. Now, many people believe that the Philpit experiment was just a realization of unconscious PK, meaning that the people participating were creating the psychokinetic phenomena. Okay, I don't know. What we do know is that when they changed the context, they changed the results, and that's all they changed. One of my favorite guys. Everybody needs a Bob, right? Skeptical spirit. So this moves us into the next question of subjective and objective phenomena. How does the media presentation affect what we're going to experience? And when does our subjective experiences or subjective views become something objective? Meaning I expect to have psychokinetic phenomena, therefore I get psychokinetic phenomena. I expect to have a message from my dead great aunt, therefore I get a message from my dead great aunt. When do we move, and this is maybe the real question we're asking, when do we move from simply being observers in the phenomena to creators of it? And I'm sure for many of you that is a question you're constantly asking in your researches. Again, how does suggestion or belief affect our outcomes? Now, many people really don't understand the power of belief, and it is overwhelming. It is probably the single most common theme in all spiritual practices. As children, you went to Sunday school or Catholic school and you're told if you have the faith of a mustard seed, what? You're going to move mountains. Jesus said, do this in my name, have faith, and it'll happen. That's across the board. You see that in a variety of religious and spiritual traditions. J.W. Brody Eanes, one of the most well-known and influential members of the 19th century Hermetic Order, the Golden Dawn, and Magical Order, wrote, "It is relatively unimportant to know whether the gods, the clepothic forces, that is the demons, or even the unknown superiors, we could think of those as enlightened beings or saints, really exist. The important point is that the universe behaves as if they existed." Now think about that. The universe behaves according to our expectations, at least when we're talking about mental phenomena, at least in that area. So what we're saying now is that, thoughts are things. That thoughts as a force not only affect our perceptions, but may actually begin to affect, or not only affect our perceptions and interpretations of reality, but may actually begin to enforce or impact the physical reality as we know it. You see this notion a great deal in the idea of tulpas, or thought forms. Anyone familiar with this idea? Right. Alexandra David Neal talked about it. She's the one who brought it to prominence. But it was the idea that she constantly thought about a particular image over a great extended period of time with the idea of others being able to see it, and eventually they were. And in fact, according to her, the image actually took on a kind of sentience of its own, almost its own desire to break away. In the West, we have a thing known as an egregor. Has anyone heard that word? Yeah. If you study any of the traditional texts on angelology, like the Book of Enoch or the Angelic Wars or any of the Dead Sea Scrolls or any of that, you often see this word brought up, and it means watcher. But we often interpret it from the late 19th century on to simply mean a thought form. But everything has an egregor or a thought form around it. Have you noticed the same types of people tend to gravitate to the same types of activities? Right. Yeah. We call that an egregor. It kind of acts as a filter. The best way to think of it is it's a culturally forming mechanism. Culturally forming mind. So what we focus on, we experience more of, and then what happens, that's what we become. It's that simple. And now, here's just something I just told you. All psychotherapeutic and all spiritual practices are based on that idea. What we focus on, we experience more of. And then that's what we become. It just can't be any other way. Okay? So what this means for those of us who are investigating the paranormal, that it's extremely important that we begin to understand our own mind and understand the origin and results of our thoughts and our feelings, so that we can understand where are we being influenced not only by media perceptions of what paranormal phenomena should be like, psychic phenomena should be like, but also maybe so we can understand if we're being influenced by genuine, we'll call it fourth dimensional beings, non-corporeal beings. Are you being influenced by them or not? I know a lot of people who think they're not. More often than not, sometimes I think they are. But you only know this if you understand the nature of your own mind. Self-knowledge and self-awareness must be the basis of our research into the paranormal. They must be if we're to avoid falling into a trap of illusion and self-delusion. Think about what I just said. Why are you undertaking this study of the paranormal? Why do you undertake this practice? If it's to become more aware, then that's what you're going to get. If it's just because you want to experience something different, then that's what you're going to get. The experience may not be different, but what you derive from it will be. Now, Eros and Evil. In his book, Swimming Where Madmen Drown, Robert Masters tells of the phenomena surrounding the writing of his book, Eros and Evil, in the late 60s, early 70s. Now, I know many of you are going to identify with this because of the use of synchronicity. Now, he calls this was a synchronicity brought upon by, quote, duration, intensity, and potency of symbols. duration, intensity, and potency. Binging. Binge watching for him. Well, binge reading and research. Okay? And I'm sure all of you have experienced something like this, either positive or negative. Okay? Now for him, during the writing of his book, he experienced the same phenomena as recorded in his research. He had an infestation of centipedes, he had tarantulas, he had scorpions, he had dead animals pop up around his house, the plant life around his house died, he had near flooding, strange winds, and yet none of his neighbors were experiencing any of the same. And visitors to the house would say, a psychic pall hung over the place, and friends remarked, an oppressive feeling was there. And yet, as soon as he was done with his book and the research was over and off it went, the phenomena lifted. Because when you direct your mind there, maybe we get more than just mental things too. Maybe somehow that begins to shape what we experience. Now, how many of you have had an experience like that? Anyone else? Now, who here would like to create something? Like you hear the Philip experiment or the Tulpa, bringing a thought form to life? Who would like that? Yeah. Now, who here? I'm sure you don't want centipedes, right? You don't want tarantulas, right? You don't want those, right? So I want you to participate with me in something that will bring beauty and harmony to the world. In fact, what does the Greeks call it? Sophia, right? Sophia, the goddess of wisdom. So I invite you to participate in the Sophia Experiment. So I think I'm going to need half of you are just going to, for the next 7 weeks, just constantly visualize this coming to life in front of us. But I need another group too. Another group, I need some of you to be a control experiment. So we're going to have our control group B. We can work with this and see what we get more of. I'd rather this than a brown-robed monk like Alexander David Niebuhr. Because of course we all dream of genie, even if it's not a genie. So the question we have to ask is it all in your head? Well, yes it is. Because understanding your own mind and the origins and results of your thoughts and feelings is critical to your not being influenced by something or someone else. Whether that be material and physical, like me talking to you, or something on the media, or something intangible. Particularly those of you doing paranormal research. So that you are not influenced by unwanted psychic influences. And the way we do that is by focusing on why are we here? Why are we undertaking this study? Is it for self-knowledge and self-awareness? If that is the basis, then you will understand that your own mind becomes both the medium and the message. And you get to shape the experiences in an outcome you want. Now, in summary, I'd like to say that, media shapes as well as forms our understanding of the paranormal. We have to accept the fact that we are creating an occult culture where the once hidden is increasingly commonplace. And that if psychic phenomena is real, then we as researchers must learn to understand our own minds, why we think, feel, and act the way we do. And we must understand that as observers, we are also participants in the phenomena that we experience. Mass media makes it easier to spread these ideas and interests in the paranormal, for better or worse. We have to begin to define how that will be, particularly those of us who have media contact, who are involved with large groups. We have to begin to define what that message is going to be, and hopefully in an accurate and meaningful way. And it is my belief that a relationship between paranormal researchers and practitioners of classical and modern esotericism would benefit both parties. Because as I've shown in the writings that we have there and in our books, that the classical schools of occultism and esotericism have a tradition, which is a collective wisdom that often goes back hundreds of years or more in some shape or form. That too many people are reinventing the wheel and you don't have to. Because a lot of people have done this before. Someone asked me earlier, what is Hermeticism? And they said, we're the Institute for Hermetic Studies. And I said, Hermeticism is simply classical Egyptian learning, which is, well, what's that? Well, they didn't have a word for religion. They just had a word for magic. They had a whole magical worldview in the way things worked and understood. Well, why is that important to me? Well, you ever hear the Renaissance? The Renaissance was a Hermetic revival. When all those things, when astrology, alchemy, Kabbalah, paranormal research is similar to what you're thinking about, was taking place. And that occurs again in the late 19th and early 20th century. I mean, paranormal research finds its roots what? In the societies for psychical research, right, that occurred in the late 19th century? Well, they're directly part of that occult revival period. There's no reason to just trace yourself back 30 or 40 years, if that. There's a whole lineage behind what is being done, and it's best if, in my mind, I think both parties can benefit, not only by the experimental expertise that paranormal researchers have, but also some of the experimental and philosophical expertise that esotericism offers. So again, the medium begins to shape the message. So, I hope that was useful to you. Do you have any questions?